minute or so to dial in, and we'll be going. Thanks. All right, let's get started. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon or this morning or this evening, wherever you are around the globe. This is the second part of a three-part series on finding your brand personality. We're pleased to have Marli Mesibov join us for this exciting DCL Learning Series webinar. I'm going to spend just a moment. This is Brian Trombley from DCL. I'm going to spend just a moment giving you a quick introduction to DCL for those of you that aren't familiar, and then we'll be turning it over to Marli. Next slide, please. So just quickly, a few slides on DCL and what makes DCL different. We've been in the data conversion business for close to 33 years at this point. And we have a team of world-class technologists that have been doing many types of conversion over the years. We've developed leading-edge software and technologies to assist us with conversions from small scale to very large scale, including automated 24/7 lights-out conversion processes. We are a U.S.-based management team headquartered in New York City. We have development and project management in our New York location, and then we have partners around the globe that assist us in certain aspects of the conversion process. We have a primary focus in complex content conversions, and you know, as you look at some of our client base in the next slide, you'll see why. We provide document digitization, XML and HTML conversions, ebook productions. We have hosted solutions that are exclusive to certain clients that might have large-scale ongoing conversion projects. We focus on big data automation. Some of our clients have their own conversion processes but hire us to manage that process, both from an oversight on the process as well as the QA aspect. We also provide editorial services to a number of clients, and those include copy editing, page composition, and similar services. Another focus area we have is in content reuse analysis. We have a software as a service offering called Harmonizer that will analyze large sets of content and find redundant data, close matches, exact matches throughout your content, helping you reduce your content footprint and the costs associated with maintaining that amount of content, either from a revision and update perspective, but also from a localization perspective. Next slide, please. And as you can see, we have a very broad client base across a number of industry verticals, both in the private sector as well as the public sector, with a large number of government clients. Next slide, please. So specifically, areas where we focus, traditional publishing, of course, with a heavy emphasis in scientific, technical, and medical publishing, but also amongst the accidental publishers, and those are organizations that produce products or services and have to publish information along with their product offering. Also, a large amount of work is done in defense and government. We also do a lot of work with libraries, associations, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So it's my pleasure to introduce Marli Mesibov, who is going to lead the bulk of this presentation. We have an hour slotted. There should be at least 10 or 15 minutes at the end of Marli's portion to address any questions that you might have. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marli.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks so much. I'm very excited to be here this afternoon for me, this morning for some people. talking about content creation and specifically content during a site migration. So today we're going to be talking about branding and particularly about the personality that exists behind a successful brand. I work as a content strategist in Boston, and I frequently work with clients to help them create a new brand, and a lot of times whether we're creating a new brand for a startup or rebooting a brand for an enterprise, a lot of times that happens around the time that a content migration or a site migration is happening. Last month, for those of you who were here, and for those of you who weren't, what we talked about was all of the things that a content strategist is responsible for during a content migration. We talked about understanding the story that guides your company and how that helps you to make decisions about what content to keep, what content to archive, what content to maybe refresh. And today we're going to go one step farther, and we're going to talk about the character that your company plays. So if you missed last month's webinar, don't worry. You can create a personality for your company without first identifying the story. These steps work very well together, but they can also be done completely separately. So I'm going to start off with a recommendation. If you haven't read Letting Go of the Words by Ginny Reddish, I highly recommend this book. One of the things that Ginny talks about is the importance of conversing with your site visitors. What she talks about is not speaking at them, not telling them what we want them to know, but actually having a conversation with them, answering the questions that they're asking, speaking in their words, in their terms. And she tells us that the two key elements to speaking with site visitors are, first of all, providing the information that they need or want, but the second piece is providing it in a way that makes them want to continue the conversation. So in this slide I actually have, this is a page literally out of her book, and where she explains that if we're having a conversation, we don't say we want to sell products. We want to have people buy our products. And when we're focusing on what we want them to do rather than what we want to do, that's the first step in opening us up to actually having a conversation. So today we're going to be focusing not on what we say, but how we say it. Because when it comes down to it, the thing that determines whether our visitors want to continue to converse with us, it's about how we look, it's about how we speak, and it's about what we pay attention to. In short, it's our personality. Now, this guy with the heavy leather jacket is a bit of a cliche, and I know we all try very hard not to judge a book by its cover, but the way that we dress and the language we use are also indicators of our personality. And that means that when we have a website that people are going to come to and make a decision about us in a split second, we can make conscious choices about the personality that we build for our company and the design choices that we make that portray that personality and the content choices that we make that will portray that personality for every website and every application that we're building. Now, just for fun, and also because I promise it will be relevant, we're going to talk a little bit about Italy. We're going to travel back in time to 16th century Italy. Now, in the 16th century in Italy, there was a very popular form of theater, and it was known as commedia dell'arte. Commedia was somewhere between scripted and improvisation. So the actors knew before they went up on the stage what the outline of the story would be, and they knew what parts they would play, but they never actually decided what the lines were. So in some situations, perhaps they would determine beforehand, well, in this story, the captain comes to town to claim his victory and to marry the young woman, but the servants help her escape to marry her true love. What made the characters really interesting, though, was the fact that they had these archetypes that they portrayed. So it didn't matter if a different actor played the same character each time over that a different performance was done, and it didn't matter that the lines changed every time. What mattered was, and the reason that the characters were so interesting, was the fact that these same 8 characters existed in each show. They were the young male lover, the young female lover, Arlecchino or Harlequin, who is typically the male lover's servant, Brighella, who's typically the young female lover's servant, Pantalone and Dottore, the fathers of the two lovers, and Il Capitano, who was usually a rival love interest, and Pedrolino, who was the captain's servant. And each of these characters had certain traits that made them instantly recognizable. For example, the young female lover was usually very sympathetic, loved nature, and really cared about the people around her. And Harlequin, who has traveled through time and is still recognizable today, was very playful and mischievous. And so regardless of who played him and what special characteristics they might give him, whether it was a different hairstyle that showed exactly how he was mischievous in one way, or whether it was a certain way of walking, or certain phrases that he would use, he always had that mischievous streak, and he usually ended up saving the day. That might sound familiar to you because we have a lot of characters who still exist in those archetypes today. Characters like James Bond, and they appeal to us because even though Sean Connery and Pierce Brosnan and Timothy Dalton are very different actors and will probably never be up again for the same role, they all maintain these basic traits that we come to know and love in James Bond. The James Bond character is a hero, but he works just a little outside the law. He's always bending the rules. He is a variation on the arrogant but ingenious Harlequin servant. And so it's a very familiar thing for us, but we keep going back to every movie, not for the familiarity, but because of the excitement of seeing this familiar character do something new each time. Now, as you may have guessed, the reason we're talking about Commedia dell'arte and we're talking about these archetypes is because we're going to do the same thing when we determine who each of our companies are, and what personality elements make up that type of company. But if we go just from Commedia dell'arte, we've only got 8 possible characters. And so it's tough to say, well, what if we don't think of ourselves as a Harlequin servant, or we don't see ourselves as a young lover, or we don't see ourselves as a father figure? Well, where do we go from there? Luckily, I did not just grab this from 16th century Italy and try to bring it up today. There have been some other people who have given it some thought. Carl Jung, a psychologist in the early 1900s, took this idea. Now, I don't know for sure that he'd ever even heard of Commedia dell'arte, but he was a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist, and he began developing all of these concepts. He developed the concept of extroversion and introversion, and he developed a concept that he called archetypes. And this explained the categories that he felt all human personalities fit into. He came up with a total of 12 different archetypes, and he said these were the deep essential parts of us as humans. And the reason he felt that they represented the whole of each of us was because they came about due to evolutionary pressures. And those evolutionary pressures remain with us through the centuries. Now, over time, he extended the metaphor to explain stages of life and biological theory, and that's where we break with him, and we fast forward about 50 years. We fast forward to 1976. When Margaret Mark and Carol Pearson took this idea that had existed in 16th century Italy and took this idea that existed in the early 1900s, and they said, wait a second, we need to put a different spin on this. These archetypes can be simplified down to just encompass the deep connections we make to particular types of people and the social perceptions that are associated with each archetype. Essentially, they took this psychological theory and they modified it so that instead of people, we could use it to define characters or brands. The 12 archetypes that they took from Jung's theory still retain some similarities to those stock characters, and that for me really reinforces the belief that these are the 12 basic types of personalities. I'll go over them all briefly. The first one that I'll start with, you'll notice, is bright yellow. This is the outlaw, and this is in some ways the James Bond character. This is a rebellious personality type associated with bending or breaking the rules for the sake of freedom. Then we have the explorer, similar to the outlaw in that There's a certain excitement associated with it, but the explorer is always learning more about what's in the physical world and what's within himself. From there we move to the creator, where we have also a lot of exploring, but here we're building new inventions. We have the hero, a bastion of success and a savior. The magician, who in some ways is similar to a hero, but the magician has a focus of making things appear out of nothing. We have the sage, bringing forth wisdom and a sense of security. The ruler, always in control. The innocent, bringing about optimism and renewing faith. The regular, as they say here, or I've also heard this called the everyman, who has a sense of belonging and togetherness. I always think of Bruce Springsteen in that role. There's the caregiver, which is a parental role, very altruistic. In some ways that goes back to the father figures that we saw in Commedia. We have the lover still. This is a very romantic character who sees the joy in the world. Although in some ways with Commedia, often the female lover was probably more of an innocent, whereas the male lover would be this lover archetype. And then there's the jester, who's always out to have a good time. And you'll notice that these are actually placed in such a way so that there are a lot of similarities between, for example, the hero and the magician, or the sage and the ruler. And there, as we come all the way around, we come full circle, so that you see similarities between the jester and the outlaw, but fewer between the jester and explorer. Now, as I described each of these characters, it's possible that certain people or companies might have come to mind for you. For example, consider Kramer from Seinfeld. He's a jester. He is always out to have a good time. And his character so embodied the archetype that Michael Richards, the actor who played him, often gets pigeonholed into this kind of stock character. But what's really interesting about these archetypes, and what to me makes them such an efficient and effective branding tool, is that there is so much variability within each archetype. Tanqueray is also a jester. Now Kramer is a falling over himself, managing to find the solution at the brink of I can't think of my phrase. I'll have to use a different one. Kramer was always coming up with a solution just when everyone else was at their rope's end. Still get a good turn of phrase there. Anyhow, Tanqueray is much more about pushing limits and partying. But they're both jesters. They're both predominantly concerned with themselves. There's a little bit of selfishness, a little bit of ego here, and there's a casualness to it. But Tanqueray brings that casualness into meaning friendly and throwing a party and high energy. Now, for us, that probably also makes us think about either people we've known who are partiers or movie stars that really have a great time, anyone who can just go and go and go. And for a company like Tanqueray, that's really important. It means that all they need to do is show one image of one person having a good time in a high energy situation. And we associate with them all of these people. We associate parties with them, and that way they're able to connect to their target audience who thinks that's what I want to be doing, that's who I want to be, or that's who I want to be talking with. Another company with a really solid archetype is PBS. PBS is the sage. They're full of wisdom, they're well-rounded, lots of experience, and they're educating the community, both young and old. The PBS mission statement, which is the sentence that summarizes why PBS exists, is actually, PBS mission is to create content that educates, informs, and inspires. And as the sage, they do all three. All of their branding choices align with this mission and with this archetype. Another thing that makes PBS unique is that they have many, many offerings within their brand. One of their products is Masterpiece, for example, which is known for period dramas, elegant costumes, sophisticated plots, well-written scripts. But another one of their offerings, Nova, seems nothing like Masterpiece. Nova has a very different audience, a different voice, a different brand. Nova actually reminds me of my middle school science teacher. It's a lot of fun and I always learn something new. And the colors are reminiscent of a mad scientist lab, you know, that neon green, that sleek dark gray. Most of the sentences on Nova's website are questions. They're known for documentaries, discovery shows, weather patterns, viruses, animals, engineering, anything you might want to learn more about. And yet both products fall under this umbrella PBS brand, and they both adhere to the mission statement. They both educate, inform, and inspire. It's possible that Nova could have gone a very different direction, or Masterpiece could have gone a different direction, but because PBS is going with the SAGE archetype, they were able to find the elements of Nova and of Masterpiece that connect to that educational aspect, and that is what causes them to have a really great focus. Not every company plans ahead like PBS did, and many, including possibly some of yours, may have found out that they've got this problem. A lot of times when you're going to start a content migration, it's because you're either creating a new service or a new product in addition to what you already had, or it's because you're trying to refresh what's going on with the pieces you already have. So one company that had a problem with that is called Scavenger. They're a company based in Boston. They're a social location-based gaming platform for mobile phones. And Scavenger was founded in 2008 by a man named Seth Pribach. And Seth is an astonishing person. He founded his first startup when he was 12 years old. He left Princeton after his freshman year to begin Scavenger. He's a very accomplished entrepreneur, developer, public speaker, and innovator. But one thing that Seth is not is a branding specialist. And I know this because after creating Scavenger, Seth kept Scavenger as both the name of his company and the name of his product. He matched his company's personality to the gaming platform personality. And there was no reason not to at that point. But then Seth and his team discovered a new niche, mobile payments. Now again, Seth is a very smart entrepreneur, so he jumped at the opportunity, he hired some more employees, and he built a mobile payments app called Level Up. Here's the problem. Now Seth has one company, Scavenger, with two products, Scavenger and Level Up. They have distinctly different personalities. They even have different names. And that's a lot of work for a marketing department to keep up with. Now, as the entrepreneur in charge, Seth might not care, but I guarantee you his marketing department is not happy to have to be completely customizing to two different audiences and two different personalities. A client of mine, Carbonite, actually found themselves in the same situation that Scavenger had because they were doing a site migration. And they realized that they had a brand that was exactly the same as their product. Carbonite considers themselves to be the Dropbox or the Google Docs, but with added security. And when I met the Carbonite team, they told me they knew absolutely nothing about their users other than the fact that they were probably Republicans. And they knew that because Rush Limbaugh did a lot of their radio advertising for them. But their marketing team was ready to make a shift. They wanted to get out of doing television commercials and out of doing radio commercials, and instead they decided they were going to move from one product, Carbonite, to two products, and they wanted to get a lot more inbound marketing being taken care of, which meant that they had to really strengthen their brand. They wanted to begin differentiating the home product from the small business product and leave room to grow both products into additional markets. So they need a content strategist to come in and learn about the two different audiences and build out one personality that would encompass both, which is really the most efficient way to do your marketing, right? You've got two audiences, but if you can get one personality that both audiences want to speak with, then you can have one really strong brand. I followed 5 steps to help them identify their archetype and the mission statement to go with it. And we're going to go through those 5 steps now, and I'll use Carbonite as the example so that we can really give some thought to this, and hopefully you can take away from this what you can do with your companies. The first step is research. I was really lucky in that Carbonite already had weekly user interviews. They had an entire floor just devoted to user research. And every week their user researchers called at least one, sometimes 2 or 3 customers to get feedback on the product. So I was able to sit in on those interviews, and then in addition to that, I was able to sit down one-on-one with a couple of their customer service people and a handful of stakeholders. From all those different conversations, I began to get a feel for the language that was being used and some of the terms that resonated with different audiences. I also learned certain phrases to avoid, and based off of that research, I created a Venn diagram that identified the differences between home customers and small business customers. I even started separating out a third group, these home offices, and this was a group that Carbonite had found was picking up what they were putting down, even though they didn't have a specific product identified for them. Step 2 is a different kind of research, but I'll refer to it as brainstorming because I think it's important to keep in mind that after the individual interviews, brainstorming has a slightly different process. For the brainstorming set, I invited all 15 stakeholders to one meeting. That's right, there were 15 stakeholders. And up until this point, Carbonite's marketing department, which had 2 of the main stakeholders were the head of marketing and the head of sales, and both of them worked with marketing, but that was only 2 of the 15, and they'd been kind of terrified to sit down with all 15 stakeholders from all across the company because they were just certain that at that point there would be too many different ideas, too many different focuses, and there was no way they would all be able to agree on how to start speaking to the people who were buying their products. But I've got a couple tricks for how to deal with that. Because ultimately, if your marketing department tries to silo themselves out and work just by themselves, just figuring out what they think they need, well, either when the other stakeholders start seeing it already out there, they'll want to call it back, which is a huge problem, or they're going to start the conversation late, which is going to waste all that effort that went into the first round. So for the brainstorming, I invited all 15 stakeholders, and I asked each stakeholder to take 5 minutes and write down individual words that represented parts of the Carbonite brand. Now I wanted to focus only on the Carbonite brand as opposed to the product brand. I wanted to look at the company as a whole. And once we had everyone writing down, I gave each person a stack of sticky notes, and between the 15 of them, we had maybe 100 different sticky notes after 5 minutes. I took them all, I put them all up on a board, and we started noticing that there was actually quite a bit of overlap. They might not have expected that, but how great is that? We've got these 15 different people focusing on 15 different things, and yet they all agree on certain things that they think of when they think of the brand they want to have. Then we had some that completely contradicted one another, and we were able to have a group discussion around it. So step 3 is taxonomy creation. So now I've got these phrases and words and ideas that I've heard from customer service and from the users. And I've got these words with a lot of overlap and a lot that we've found out what contradicts, and we've come to some conclusions on that. I've got all the words from the stakeholders. Now we start to create a taxonomy. The taxonomy at its base is just a list of vocabulary terms that I was going to use to convey Carbonite's personality. The taxonomy is important because I don't want this company to start sounding like me. I want the company to sound like this person Carbonite we're creating. So where I might refer to a document, Carbonite prefers the term file. And while I might say that Carbonite protects files, they prefer to say that they back up files. So the taxonomy has 3 sections. It has the preferred term, such as backup. It has the definition. Now backup can mean many different things, and I don't care what the dictionary says it means. I want to know what our users think it means. What definition are they going to use, and what definition is the Carbonite company going to want them to use? Sometimes those are 2 different things. So we need to find one that everybody's going to be comfortable with. In this case, to back up was to reinforce the security of what is already in place. And then we come up with the synonyms. Now let's say that backup is the term that Carbonite uses, but a lot of their users, a lot of their customers are instead saying protect. Well, in that case, protect is going to be one of our synonyms, because what that means is we're going to use backup frequently, but since you don't want to just be repeating the same word across a paragraph multiple times, we'll also slip in protect and copy and reinforce. And in that way, we are both using terms that are familiar to the customer and getting them to start associating that same definition that they have for protect with the definition that we have for backup. So slowly, we may actually start getting our customers to use the word backup, to use these words that we want them to be using. This is also great because it means that after I leave, Carbonite can hire new copywriters. They can have all across their marketing team lots of different people writing things for Carbonite, and they'll all sound like they're coming from the same person. So this brings us back to those archetypes, because now we have enough information to actually select one. We know what those preferred terms are, and the terms, rather than saying this is our archetype, let's come up with terms that work with it, we need to be saying these are the terms. What does that mean about us? What archetype are we? For Carbonite, we were able to identify them as a magician. Now, if you are working as a content strategist, particularly if you're a consultant, I don't recommend bringing in this wheel and having the clients look at all of the different options, because obviously nobody wants to be regular. And very few people actually look at this and think, I want to be innocent or an outlaw. We have bad connotations with those terms. Everybody wants to be a hero. But these terms can mean and do mean good things. And even though your company wants to be a hero, they don't necessarily want to be seen by their clients as coming in and sweeping in to save the day. For some people, that's going to mean that their clients see them as too disconnected from them. They want to be seen as a little bit maybe friendlier or more casual than a hero. And that's okay, because each and every one of these archetypes is successful in its own way, and there are successful companies that use each of these archetypes. So for Carbonite, what I found was the real focus was they kept saying was that the files would magically be able to reappear. They were anywhere you wanted them to be, in an instant, magic, from the cloud, here, there, places you didn't know it could be, saving things that you thought were lost forever. And this, to me, was really about being a magician. Where a sage might walk you through and explain, here they knew their users didn't care why their files were saved. They just knew that it appeared, and that was what was important to them. Once you've determined who your archetype is, that's when you start getting into a mission statement. And you can put together a document like the one that I've created, which I call Message Architecture Document. Ultimately, this is the document that a content strategist needs to build all the content your client is ever going to want. You include your taxonomy terms here, the audiences you interviewed, the priorities that you learned from them, and any examples of voice that you want to incorporate. But the big piece is this core message down at the bottom. Position the value of the subject matter to the key audiences succinctly and simply. That's that mission statement and the supporting messages that go with it. This message architecture document is the tool that's going to support all of the work that follows. So that core message should essentially be the first thing that you think of, the first thing that you build thinking of how this company speaks. So now what we're thinking is we've got a magician here. We've got a magician who is witty, not silly, a magician who's approachable, a magician who's trustworthy and competent. What would that magician say to describe what Carbonite was? And what we came up with was Carbonite helps you keep your files safe so you can get them wherever and whenever you need them. Within that, we were able to identify missions for all the products that Carbonite creates. We had busy, intelligent small business owners who needed low prices and time-saving features, so Carbonite for Small Business focused on those elements, while still holding true to this statement. The family-oriented collectors were storing photos, videos, and Word documents. These were the home users. And for them, we want to reinforce security and accessibility of these emotionally charged files. And they were still encompassed by this umbrella mission statement. For everyone, we were keeping their files safe, and they could get them wherever and whenever they needed them, which we felt gave a sense of that instantly, magically. Based off of this, the design team was able to work hand in hand with the marketing team to redesign the Carbonite site. We connected the language to visuals that supported the sense of security, making Carbonite approachable and competent, highly secure, relatable, and trustworthy. Now, since the time that we had this up, Carbonite's gone through 3 more refreshes over the past year and a half, and each time they've been able to move more and more through really just refreshing this same brand, this same archetype, and still being that great personality. And what I took away from this is that as content strategists, we have the power through words to build a person, to create a personality. And essentially, we are taking that power and we're creating a brand. Thank you. Brian, are we going to go on to questions now?
Yes, great. Thank you, Marli, and for all your sage advice. I think we will classify you as a sage. As you are. Yeah, so please ask any questions. There's a chat window on your GoToWebinar panel. Should be on the left or right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to type in any questions and submit those. A couple of questions that have come in already. First one, Marli, do companies ever represent more than one archetype or a blend of archetypes?
Well, the short answer is not successfully.
Okay.
Lots of companies, when they first look at that wheel, do say, well, I want to be a hero and a magician. I want to be all of these different archetypes. But the whole goal of that is to help focus. And the same way that as a human being working in a job, you have one primary role, and you can still have lots of things that you enjoy, but you're going to come back and focus to that primary role. That's what we need to give to our brands as well. We need to have one really overarching piece.
Okay, great. Thank you. A couple of other questions. What happens if my company can't decide on one archetype?
Yep, that happens a lot. There are 2 ways to do that. I have seen lots of companies try some minor A/B testing, having the marketing team or the design team work to mock up maybe one homepage towards each of 2 archetypes, and then do some A/B testing with the target audience to just see what's getting a better reaction. Alternatively, as I mentioned, a lot of archetypes have some overlap, and so usually you can look at what your company says they want to do and what they actually do and help distill that down into one type. And if you still can't choose at that point, then it's likely that your company hasn't actually given enough thought to what they are.
Great. Thank you, Marli. We've got a couple of other questions, but please, audience, please feel free to send in additional questions through your chat window. Another question, Marli, that came up. Who should be responsible for maintaining the message architecture?
Well, ideally, that's what our user researchers are going to be doing, because those are the people who are going to be checking back in and saying, yes, we're still getting feedback that this is who's coming and using our products. Alternatively, if your team does not have dedicated user researchers, this does belong to the marketing team. If your marketing team is working in a silo and is not connecting with your design team or with your higher-ups, then everyone's experienced this problem where if marketing is not, at some point or other, if marketing is not working with the rest of the company, then marketing can't represent what the rest of the company is working to create or build or do. So my hope is that by putting this in the hands of marketing, they'll be able to draw from this knowledge that the rest of the company has as well and really work together, which we'll be talking about more next month.
Great, great. One last question here, and please, audience, if you have any additional questions, please send them in now. The last question we have here is there ever a situation where a company would want totally separate brands for different products? So I would imagine that could be, separate archetypes for different areas of their business.
Yep. It doesn't happen often, but actually one really great example is Microsoft. When Microsoft came out with the Xbox, they had no idea if it was going to be successful or not. And actually, if I remember correctly, is it the Zune? I don't remember if that's the name of the product, but Microsoft came out with a product that was essentially supposed to go up against the iPod. And they created a totally different brand with a totally different personality, a totally different archetype, and it failed miserably. But it was great because since Microsoft had not associated this new product with their old brand at all, it didn't tarnish Microsoft nearly as much as it might have otherwise. Right. So they did the same thing with Xbox. And Xbox has been tremendously successful, right. But if you take a look at it, at their branding, it has nothing to do with the Microsoft that you know from Office and all of the useful Office tools. Right. So that's a situation where they took a risk. They obviously knew that it could fail, having done that once before. They made what ended up being a really great decision for them. They do need to either have a separate marketing team or have their marketers working on two totally different aspects at once, and they do have to maintain that completely different brand across their site, across a different site. But the profits from Xbox
One other question that just came in, do you ever do studies that identify a common archetype of the audience you're marketing to in order to influence how you communicate and or market to them?
I haven't, but that sounds like a really great idea. Yeah, that sounds like it would be a tremendously useful study. One thing that I don't give as much credence to as I think some other branding specialists do is some branding specialists believe that there are ideal archetypes to work together, sort of like how you'll hear that if you are a Sagittarius, then you're supposed to be with a Cancer or a whatever other sign. Mm-hmm. And some people feel that similarly, for example, if your company is a ruler, that will work particularly well if your users tend to be innocents. But I don't believe that human beings fall into archetypes quite as easily as fictional characters and brands. So equally, I don't think that brands pair up quite that nicely. I think it's really difficult to lump your users into the lover or the caregiver or the hero or the explorer.
Right, right. Yeah, I can see your audience you're marketing to, transcending a number of archetypes clearly.
Yeah. Whereas, when I go to REI, I love REI because to me, when I'm there, I am the explorer. I want, that is clearly the most important part of my life. But then, of course, the moment that I'm working on a webinar, yeah, I do kind of go into sage mode. I have to, otherwise I wouldn't believe that I could have anything valuable to share.
Right, right. Great. Audience, any other questions, please get them in. We still have a little bit of time, and I want to let you know that the third and final installment of this three-part series that Marli's conducting will be on Thursday, March 27th, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And so if you haven't registered for that yet, the registration is available on our website, and some of you or all of you will be getting reminders to register at some point in the coming weeks. Any other questions? We still have a few minutes. I'll give you another 30 seconds or a minute to log any questions. We still have quite a few folks dialed into the webinar. Okay, here's one. Did Carl Jung create the archetypes based on people or characters?
He created them based on people. He felt that each of our personalities could be brought down to those basic archetypes.
Right.
And that is where I'm saying, as a branding specialist, I would love to get a conversation going between 5 content strategists and 5 psychotherapists and see where that led to. Because yes, he did believe very strongly that they represented our innermost selves.
Right, right. Any more questions? We've still got time, and nothing's coming through. So Marli, thank you once again for some very insightful information, and we look forward to seeing you next month. As a reminder to everybody on the webinar, these sessions are being recorded, and they're available both on our website. If you go to, I think, the resources page under webinars, there's upcoming and there's recorded webinars, and if you go into the recorded webinars, you'll be able to view and download the webinars, and I believe they're also uploaded to DCL's YouTube account. So thank you all for attending. Again, thank you, Marli, and we look forward to having you all join us again on the 27th of March. Thanks so much.
Thank you.